You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Wil Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. All right, Slick Talkers, we are back to another episode of the show, and I couldn't be more excited about this one. Y'all listening might be like, you always say you're excited whenever you have a guest on and do all this stuff. And no, I really, truly mean that I'm excited for this episode. It's been a long time in the making. I've been letting Sam build in the background and in the shadows without bugging him to be on the show pre a bunch of initiatives and product builds. So I've been waiting. I've been patient, Sam, to get you on. I've been wanting to get you on since the day we met. But for all the listeners out there, we have a special guest on. We're going to talk about AI. And I know AI either could be a topic that you have felt like you've overheard or you don't know enough about. It could be either way on the pendulum. So today we're going to talk about not just AI, but how AI impacts your operations. There's going to be a ton of good nuggets in this episode. So Sam Dundas, welcome to the show, co-founder of Bestie AI. Welcome. How you doing?
Wil Slickers.
Oh no.
Doing this. Thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited to catch up and to dive deep into all this stuff. It's really, really exciting.
Well, I'm glad you have a new Bestie shirt. You know, it's always good to see that old fun memory from VRMA.
It's rip proof. You can see.
Yeah, it is rip proof. A fun story for all the listeners. We'll maybe tell another day. But dude, it's been so cool to watch your growth and your story unfold in our industry since you and I first connected via email. I got an email from you asking for some advisory board stuff. And, you know, you actually were the person that pushed Michael Brandy and I to launch Good Morning Startups. And so, you know, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about obviously what is Bestie AI? What are you and Arlo building over there? But then let's also talk about the application that you've actually found personally for your own properties that you're managing as well. So there's a lot to uncover, but let's start in the beginning. Where does everything begin for you and Bestie?
Yeah, so it's I guess the real starting point was all the way back in COVID. I mean, I feel like everybody has their COVID turning point, you know, to like from basically COVID hit March. I've been working at this enterprise event planning software, and I've always been really interested, long before tech, in hospitality. It's always been restaurants was like my first job. Before that was a paper route, lemonade, literally like lemonade stands, like, you know, busking. I was actually like a GM of a nightclub through university, which was crazy. I was like going school full time. And then Thursday, I would go from waking up at like 8 to going to bed at like 11 p.m. to working at 8 p.m. and going to bed at like 6 a.m. with like the security teams and like getting like breakfast at like 5 a.m. after we finished inventory. So hospitality, restaurants, that was always my passion since way before all this. And then I thought events were really cool. So through the nightclub stuff, I worked with like Budweiser and did a bunch of like campus events for them. Like we'd shut down this major street where I went to university and did this big Corona Sunsets Festival where we live streamed across 5 different cities and had this really cool experience. And I just loved all that stuff. I threw multiple large events, kind of small music festivals in Canada, in different cities as well. And then I was like, well, what's the fun, you know, unlimited access to capital version of events is like corporate stuff. And tech. So I moved to Montreal. And this is like leading up to basically 2018. Started working at an enterprise event planning software, like kind of started as an Airbnb for event spaces. And funny story, actually one of their biggest investors was the founder of Luxury Retreats. So kind of a cool, small world there. And so I worked with them and COVID hit, and this was like an event planning business in COVID, right? And even though it was software, that just everything got cratered. But I loved the guys that I worked for, the founders. I got to see everything firsthand. And just figured like the first thing I thought of when COVID hit, like when we all got sent home that one day that everybody remembers, was like how are we going to come out of this like better, like net positive. I didn't say it had to be exponentially better, but how do we come out of this? What could be a year or two, or I guess like 3, like net positive. So a big thing for me was that like I know I want to start a company. And I knew I wasn't ready when I went to Montreal and worked for those guys, but I saw it firsthand, and they had done a seed round and, got a lot of traction, did the whole software thing. And they were non-technical co-founders, both of them. And so they had a lot of challenges with that and attracting talent and building the platform. So, it's a long kind of winded answer, but essentially I had spent all of 2020 looking for a co-founder. And I told the guys at Planned, this was the software I was working at, like not Planned Parenthood, but planned.com.
Yeah.
And that I wanted to start a company, and they were totally supportive. And they're like, yeah, obviously we knew you were going to do that. So it was interviews with co-founders all year, trying to find a technical kind of counterpart. And then funny enough, Arlo had posted a AngelList posting for a co-founder, for a non-technical kind of sales biz dev co-founder. And AngelList is also the platform. I think it's called Well-Found now. I haven't looked for a job in a while, but back then it was AngelList. That's how I found my first job too in Montreal. But basically met up with him. It was December 8th of 2020. I remember it. He like emailed me back, and he had a unique name. And so I didn't even know if he was legit. And then he was really legit. And so I flew down to New York in the middle of the pandemic, went to Times Square for the first time, like totally ghost town, like every tourist goes to Times Square, but I had to see it. I had to see it in the middle of COVID. And we just instantly decided, we're going to work together. Not really sure what. She has obviously all the background in the AI stuff. So we started in e-commerce, and that's a whole other story. But basically that's started in 2021, and then I'll stop there.
No, it's great. And it's funny because I was doing some research pre-interview with you. Obviously, all of the listeners know I do a pre-chat and then, do all the things afterwards. And I was listening to your episode with Bill Faith on STR Unfiltered. And he's like, holy shit, what? You could post a job for a co-founder on, wherever and find a co-founder that way. I've never had that. So yeah, like I know other people that have found co-founders through, Y Combinator and other places that you can look for either a technical co-founder or a biz dev, kind of like you. But it's a gift. I feel like that you kind of knew, you're like, hey, I'm not a technical guy, right? Like that's not me. I'm not going to be the builder behind the scenes on the tech. I can be the builder in front of the scenes and start getting the product to market. And so finding Arlo, and shout out to Arlo too, because dude, every time we're on a call, like about Bestie with Michael or Brandy or me and whatnot, Arlo's in the background, just grinding, cranking away. Met him at STR Wealth, and super nice guy, just really smart. So, it's just funny how that all kind of comes about. But I'm curious, let's take it back to the event planning business and getting into that world with the tech side when you were with planned.com. Is planned.com?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pre all this stuff, did you know that you were going to be a founder one day, or was the bug so contagious that you were just like, I need to start something?
Yeah, I mean, 1,000%. Since like the day before I can remember, it was like the one thing that, I think it's a lot of people have skills and they show themselves in different ways. Especially this industry, there's a lot of savvy, just cleverness that I've found talking to some of the more like established operators, that they just have that kind of street smarts that like lends itself really well to this industry. And that's the same thing applies to the vendor side, so long as you have the kind of technical backing along with it. So I found that from day one, I always knew I wanted to do it. And then software was something I got interested in when I was like 18, 19, that I knew there was a role for, like, you didn't have to be some like Stanford engineer to like build something. Like there is actually a role for these other people. Like you're either building it or you're selling it, but that is important. And I always say, well, I would be nothing without the engineering side, but a lot of the engineering people agree the other way around. So it's all like about perspective. So I always knew I wanted to do software mainly because of the speed that you could do distribution and get big. And then what I really wanted to do when I was thinking about this when I was 18, 19, is that could be the quickest way to fit in a 30 or 40 year career into like 5 or 7 years. And then have some optionality to do like the stuff I really love, which is events and restaurants and the kind of like stuff that just doesn't make money.
Yeah, exactly. Do you ever see a event business in your future post Bestie and big exit?
For sure. I would love to do like music festivals. I'd like to do unique music festivals. Would be like the fun if you just could just like write that would be my go-to for music festivals. And then some sort of cool bar that I could invite my friends to and lose money eventually. But the event stuff was just a fun way to, it was just a great right place, right time, because it was event plus tech. And then when I spent so much time at the tech company, then it was like, okay, all that imposter syndrome of can you start a tech company? You're like, well, you look at two, non-technical French guys and they're doing it. So like, what can these guys do that I can't do kind of thing? The more time you spend with some like very talented people, that whether it's smart or not, like you start to think you can do what they can do, even if it's not. And so I was starting to feel that a bit. So that's when I was like, the tech thing was an afterthought. It became like, oh, that could be the first thing. And then, but the whole being a founder thing was always the move.
Well, you mentioned, you knew that software was a way that you get to a certain scale. You didn't have to have like this Harvard MBA type background. One of the things I've noticed and listening to a bunch of other podcasts outside of the industry and having over 300 episodes under this show was that a lot of founders that I've interviewed, CEOs even, they never did well in school. They, barely graduated, like the classic founder, startup, entrepreneur or entrepreneur story, right? Were you good in school? Did you have like a good like report card basically every semester?
No, but I wasn't like, I did everything in French. And so like,
oh wow,
French was like tough to learn like the French thing, but also like there's some interesting like differences when you learn French and you're also learning like science and math. And I was really like into like high school sports as well. And I was really not that interested. It was basically like getting into university, and it's probably such a tell that I'm Canadian, let's call it college. Getting into college was, but then when I say college, maybe you think I went to school in the States, which I didn't. So I don't know which one, but
university works.
Okay. So there are universities in Canada. Okay, there's multiple, and they're nice. Okay, they're not like but I was never going to get in. When I found out what the benchmarks were, I found it when I was like grade 10. I was like, okay, you have to be high 80s, and I'm trending in low 70s. So high 80s just to get some run of the mill university. So I don't know, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. It was actually, I got into some arts program because the barrier to get in was a lot easier. And then when I was in the program, I just started sending referral letters from all of my former bosses to the admissions department, even though they didn't accept anything other than your GPA. And then I sent like 10 letters from all these like important people I had met through the years, just like character references and stuff. And then I got an email like a month before the program starts saying, look, like stop sending us letters. Like if you want to be in the business program, you're in, and you start September. So that's how I got that's how I got to business school. And that's what brought me into the whole scene.
Dude, I love how the hustle has carried you through so many parts of life, not just with Bestie when you emailed me, but you literally been sending letters and emails to people since day one. I love it. I think there's always this conversation, right? Like, are entrepreneurs specifically born or are they made, right? And sometimes people can say, it's both. Like, you can be born an entrepreneur, you can be made an entrepreneur. But from your story, it sounds like you were made to be an entrepreneur just from day one. Like, you've had that tenacity and that hustle built inside of you. And it's super exciting for me to like hear you tell that, because it's just, not a lot of people see a hurdle or a barrier and they're like, like if you said, oh, that's the benchmark to get into the university with high 80s, I'm low 70s. I guess I just am not going to college, right? Like that could have been the acceptance of your fate. But instead you were like, no, I'm just going to start sending all these referral letters.
Yeah, I think it's like there was also like this. We were going through this. It's almost like you come to terms with these realities, and you're like, for an example, let's say we were 6 months away as a startup from running out of money. And I was feeling like, I'm saying hypothetically, and not like I've experienced this before, but I'm just saying, let's say like we were 6 months away from running out of money. the amount of stress that I would feel 6 months out was only going to exponentially increase when it's like 5 and 4 and 3. So let's say in this scenario where like we're 6 months out, the frame of reference of being like, I need to, like, this stress is going to compound. I have to actually come to like accept it and realize that it's only actually going to get more stressful. In that case, like, I have to find another way of managing this, because it's otherwise, looking at it that way, it's only going to get worse. Like with university, I knew even if I tried really, really hard, I was not going to get from low 70s to high 80s. So there's just going to have to be another way. You know what I mean? And so I think that, and this translates for anybody, I think this industry is so interesting because I talk to so many operators that are either have their sights set on making this their full-time gig, or they're like, that's like the optionality. They're saying, you know, if I get to X units and doing the math, and if I'm ambitious about this and risk taking, I can get here. I think that like the fallacy that I fell into when I was working at Plan was that I felt like I would need to jump into it in order to really say I'm going to be an entrepreneur. But then the real thing that I found that was really helpful was making the opportunity cost so high first before you make the jump. And that doesn't mean you're like declining, you're walking away from your opportunity by saying, oh, that's my, you know, when people want to be creators, like Mr. Beast like tweeted this the other day, he's like, thousands of people don't make it for every one person that makes it. The number one mistake I see is people go too early. And it's 100%. So true in any industry. Like, it will go that way. Like, you have to be like actively working towards this, anything. But like, even you, I mean, when you started podcasting and stuff, like, you knew that you would have to put in, I've seen so many examples of this, put in so much time before it becomes like a very like weighing the odds question. That imagine how exciting that is. You have this dream you want to do. For me, it was being an entrepreneur. I have to be so confident in that, like, I can just de-risk it. And that means being financially stable in my current job until the point where I know I can take the plunge. But just saying that I'm going to jump into it and then figure it out, that's where all the stress comes. So people say entrepreneurs are big risk takers. They're actually really, I think, like very calculated in mitigating risks and just being confident with the fact that they can mitigate risks. And so I really like I like meeting property managers who are like in that verge of, okay, I'm actually next year, I'm trying to go full time. So, okay, what do you have to do to get there? And that's why there's a lot of people in the space that are really helpful with that kind of wisdom and going from kind of 1 to 2 to 5 to 10. And I've kind of experienced similar things.
Yeah, we're very much risk hedgers, where it becomes a balance and scale game. I was very lucky. I always told people, you know, because when I first started our podcast network, everyone was like, how do we go full time like you? And I was like, look, I was doing it for maybe a little over a year before I was able to go full time. But earlier in that year, I had that weighing odd conversation with myself. Like, hey, I just made my salary 4 times in 1 month. Can I do this again? Can I do it again? And can I do it again? If I can do it 3 times in a row, that's when I will look at taking the plunge. And, you know, I think you need to, there's also the right timing, right? Like podcasting in 2018, there was 5 of us. Now I have a network that has over 35. And that's just for short-term rentals and hotels. It's not even getting into restaurants. So like, it's very a timing thing, a risk hedging, all the other stuff. And I love what you just said, because it's you learn so much, especially about yourself in that time period before you take the leap. And some other people, I've heard, you know, Mark Cuban, I've heard a bunch of other entrepreneurs, they do get quote unquote lucky, right? Like, this is what I'm going to do. They find money, they have money, whatever it may be. And it just works. It just works. So really exciting. We're 18 minutes in, Sam, and we haven't really discussed Bestie AI. So I love this. And I think the listeners are going to get a lot of value. It's a fun conversation and stuff I like talking about, but I would love to know, just let's get a 60-second overview of Bestie AI and how you guys have built this tool, because frankly, there have been, you know, such a big AI boom, and you and I talked about this, and we're going to kind of talk about the history of AI on the show as well. But, you know, there's ChatGPT really opened up this floodgate of AI companies that weren't making it and were failing, pivoted to AI, companies that had AI and never talked about it, eventually started making it a core feature and product. Who knows? There's so many things, but you guys, you know, let's talk about the product of Bestie and how you guys have turned it into the tool that it is today versus the V1. Because I know the V1 you were talking about, especially on Bill's show, communications is really easy for an AI tool to get into. but the Bestie co-pilot that you guys have created is a completely different offering for property managers and hospitality entrepreneurs. So I would love to, let's talk about it. Give us a 60-second overview, and then we'll dive in for some more AI talk.
Awesome. Yeah. So it helps to know that I have managed properties for years. I have 35 rentals that I manage. This all started because I've tried, like most people, try a lot of different tools and found also had this background in AI with my co-founder, Arlo. So Bestie, really simply put, is a instantly integrating messaging app that focuses on guest messaging and upselling. So like our whole thing is it has to be like three things. The first thing is it has to be insanely easy to install. So just you hook up your API key, no manual onboarding, instantly syncs up your listings, instantly starts generating responses. You can do that on autopilot or on draft mode where you have like approval. It's kind of like driving a Tesla versus full self-driving. And then it's, so that's a big thing. Quick integration. Second thing is messaging, like I said. And then the third one is revenue upselling. So a lot of these apps have cool, price labs. You can drop your prices for certain strategies and different things like that. Our whole thing is everything has to be done through conversations with the guests. So we do have a lot of revenue automation tools as well, which is why people like us. And for some background on where we started our first version in August. In that time, we're filming this in March. We're just over 20,000 properties on the platform. We're integrated with HostAway, Bestie, and then we have another 7 that we're working on right now that are launching all the next 2 months.
All right. So you just heard Sam talk about Bestie and HostAway and the other integrations that they have. Well, we at Slick Talk are big fans of Hostfully, and I personally use Hostfully for my property management business. And yes, I talked to Sam a little bit before this episode, and I was like, yo, Sam, when are we getting this integration with Hostfully live? I would love to obviously start using the tool as an advisor. I believe in the product. I want to use it in our day-to-day, and I want to make sure that we're getting the perks and benefits all of the users are as well. So it's coming live. If you're a Hostfully user, then get ready because it's going to be in the marketplace one of these days here shortly. It's just a couple weeks away. As you hear further on in this conversation, APIs and connections seem easy, but it's actually the way that all this software and technology communicates to each other. So it's coming soon. But as you're building your brand, as you're building your business, and you're freeing up your time and getting more efficient with pricing and all these other things, guess what? Your brand is so important. It's better not to be just on Airbnb and just on Vrbo and just all these other sites. So get with Hudson Creative Studio as well to get your brand book direct site up and running with their own booking engine and webpage that makes it look amazing, makes a seamless experience for your guests to book directly with you. So you're not renting your guests, you're owning them. Get Hostfully and Hudson Creative Studio today. And we're back to the Bestie episode. Yeah, it's incredible what you guys have been able to build from the day that we first met. And so people listening right now are probably hearing, okay, like AI, great. I'm already sick and tired of AI talk. And then or people immediately, when they hear it, they think of ChatGPT, right? And so Bestie, in the best way I can explain, is not a ChatGPT. Like you said, there's an automation version where they can, the bot or AI can definitely just respond and get stuff off your plate. But then there's that draft mode where it can basically wait for your approval, kind of like how you're talking about the Tesla self-driver, driving it yourself. And I think that's really great because a lot of people, especially in our industry, are so focused on the hospitality piece, right? Like we want to provide a good service. And sometimes when you type things into ChatGPT or whatever, it gives you like this weird answer. Like, all right, I want to make sure I'm not having that happen. We're avoiding the weird, awkward phase, the teenage years of AI. But you and I were talking before this, and it's really interesting the way you kind of painted this picture around the IQ of AI, right? Like the early days, it was, all this like craziness. It wasn't like well-trained. Now it's got this like IQ. So can you give us a little bit of the history of the landscape of like the AI itself in the sense of the ability to actually properly operate its functions and not just spit out random jargon?
Yeah. So, the quick crash course there is like, this is all possible because of this. People have probably heard of like Moore's Law, like the speed in which computing power has been like doubling over a period of time since like the start of computing. And so if you were to look at our computing ability back in, like 70 years ago, it was like 0.007 units of compute per second, and now it's 35 billion. So like in 70 years, it's gone from less than 1 to 35 billion, basically call it kilometers an hour or miles an hour, as far as its ability to move. So what happens when that expands, and if you just even look at NVIDIA, which is all over the news right now because of its being it's kind of the core processor hardware behind all of this, right? Is that their computing ability has 1000x in just the last 8 years. So 1000x, 100,000x, billions, these are all words, but where it actually, the reason why ChatGPT was so visceral and so viral is for the first time, what these researchers have been working on for years, they got to package it all up into something that it just looks like magic. So if I were to not even tell you about the ChatGPT product and just tell you that there's this interface now that can run billions of these parameters and all this fancy computer science stuff, and none of that would have materialized until I handed you a little chatbot that you could talk to, and it literally sounds like someone's in there, right? But it's not even that kind of, it's not that at all, right? So that's the magic of it. So that's how we kind of got here. So you have all these big companies, rushing to build competing models, and it's getting infinitely smarter. And so one big use case of it is coding, right? So it's like software development, and then natural language. So training, it's trained on, Common Crawl and a lot of the internet. And so it just has access, kind of like what you'd expect of the entire internet put into a little bottle that you could talk to. And so as of now with that, we can put all of these really cool use cases together, including customer service, which is just an use case. But of course, we're expanding to do a lot more than just that. And I can get into that as well.
No, I love that. And there's other pieces too. I think a lot of people, and especially conversations we have on the show, you probably heard them at either VRMA, STR Wealth. You've been to the trade shows, right? You've been to the conferences and events, and you hear what people are talking about. And a lot of it can be oh, great, another software to add to my tech stack, another thing to there's all these layers in hospitality. Us being such an entrepreneurial community and group, it can be, it's exciting. It can be daunting. Looking at another chat interface or a chat interface specifically for your guest communications, easy onboarding, all this other stuff, it's hard to justify just that alone. But what I love with what you guys have done is you built an upsell feature where it actually, yes, you're paying for the product, but it makes you more money than it costs you, right? So you guys have been able to get ahead of the curve and actually bringing a real monetary value add to operators. And so talk to me about the computing model, right? You just mentioned, you basically got this genie in a bottle, right? And how is this standing out? Because I remember in 2021, the big Dogecoin, crypto, Web3 conversation, right? We had a lot of this hype, and now it's very much fizzled out. How is this AI trend and topic, and even the product that you guys have built, outlasting what we saw in 2021 with crypto and Web3?
Yeah, not a flash in the pan. How is this not another flash in the pan?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think what's happening here, whether you have that AI fatigue, any other new category or not, what's really after call it 8 months of talking to literally almost 1,000 property managers, what's happening here is just a new category. That the best analogy is price optimization, 10 years ago, that you have all these PMSs, right? And as the average user, you kind of have, if you talk to 80% of people, I have my PMS, if they even have one. And then I have price optimization, and then I have some sort of communication / operational support. And so PMS is a software and the price optimization is a software, and those are must-haves. But then this third category is offshore resources, is your mental well-being, being on top of the things 24/7. It's, it can be people that you pay onshore. That is an entirely mechanical process that, of course, guest messaging is part of it. Guest messaging is probably only 20 or 30% of it, of course, because these are real places and real people staying. Real shit happens, real stuff happens.
Yeah. Sorry. No, you swear.
All right. I don't know if it's PG. So to answer your question, there's no way that we look at this for a second, it's flash in the pan, and then we just move on. Because if that were true, then you wouldn't have a bunch of vendors popping up the same way you had for price optimization or even the businesses themselves. This is not only just as big as those two categories, it's much bigger because this can do things that neither of those can do. If you look at the fact that we were in a stage where there was, now I would say there's three, like Price Labs, Wheelhouse, and Beyond are like the three big players, but they went out and proliferated across 35 different PMSs and went from being this new thing. Like I've spoken to Andrew from Wheelhouse a lot, and he was telling me he was reaching out to Airbnb hosts directly in 2010, trying to get them to pitch them on this, right? Like that it was a thing. Now it's completely table stakes, but that's where it started. And that took 10 years. And this, because of the acceleration of the internet and the acceleration of compute, it's not going to take 10 years. It's going to take like 2 or 3. So I think there's a 0% chance that this is a flash in the pan, because this, when you look at anybody's operation, this is such a critical part of it. And the alternative solution is not just that it's expensive, and that it has that like mental toll of just dealing with it, but it's also incredibly inefficient. It's just humans weren't built to do the things that they have to do when being an operator at scale. Like you weren't able to sit and copyright and change your listings and update this and switch around photos. Like all of these tasks you weren't built to respond to a guest who was too lazy to read the amenities or read the check-in instructions. Like humans weren't built for that. You were built to grow the business, to do the one thing that nothing else can do. No software can do, which is build relationships. Like all of those things that actually make a difference to your life. That's what you were built to do. So that's why I think that like we can agree that it might not be there yet for everybody. And a lot of the default, even in the venture space, are like, we're just going to sit and let you guys duke it out and see who comes out on top before picking a winner. And the cool thing is that's also going to force these products to get better and cheaper, more accessible. And so I think that's the round-winded answer. I'm saying like, you can ignore it for the next like 6 months to 8 months. When I was first starting and speaking with operators, I would tell them the same thing. I'd say, look, we're not quite there yet. I see, like, we can see where it's going, but like, we need like 6 months. But I would say that it is a complete, foregone conclusion that everybody's going to have something. And whether it's for messaging, whether it's for optimizing your listings, whether it's for operational tasks, this is going to be the one we're talking 2-3 years from now. It's going to be 100%. There's going to be a lot more even vendors than there are now.
Well, it's very interesting. And I would love to know what your thoughts or your answer is on the question inside of, a lot of people get into hotels and hospitality because they love people, right? Like they're like, I specifically me too. I remember my first front desk job. I didn't care much about like the check-in process and the to-do list I had at my front desk. I cared about connecting with my guests, making sure Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes were taken care of. They had their drink vouchers, that they were having a good time. Like everything was fun. I loved the relationship aspect. And there's a lot of people in the short-term rental industry, especially on the VRMA side, where they've been here 10, 15, 20 years, 25 years even, and they're all about hospitality. So when people hear, we weren't made to optimize our listing, we weren't made to change our copy and all of our things. Do you think they're like, and I think a lot of people too, especially when they're talking about futuristic side of things where robots take over the world and AI takes their jobs, right? Like, and everyone says like AI is not going to take your job. People using AI are going to take your job. Where's the hospitality in all of this? Like, where is the connection and opportunity within AI? Because I'm a big believer, especially in Bestie, but where does the human connection play a role?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a very valid concern. I think that the promise of this software at the end of the day, whether it's now or a year from now, is, let's call it we're looking at a 30 to 70% reduction in costs, right?
Yeah.
Of a big part of the OpEx. So, and that's just going to keep going up as far as cost savings. And then on the other end, the revenue generation. But let's just say it was a cost cutting tool. It's going to be up to the property manager on what they do with that money. So if they're a profit driven hospitality person, they could pocket all of that. Or if they are a hospitality driven property manager, they can put that into, at the end of the day, like what really matters is when I show up, how good is the cleaning job? Like when I show up, is there anything personalized physically in the space that you've invested in, like a wine, a nice glass of wine or champagne or
handwritten note on top of it.
There's actually only so much you can do from the digital side that even really matters. Like I would argue that I would take a somewhat cold texter that show up to a unit. And I've stayed in probably 40 Airbnbs, and all of those experiences where like the communication wasn't so great, but I show up and it's like they went, some people are like, they grab eggs from the local farm, and like I've seen it a lot. I haven't seen it all, but I've seen a lot. That's what moves the needle. And like that is the stuff that you could say isn't as scalable, but it is the stuff that humans can do. So I think that honestly, for the people that are like, it's all about hospitality, I agree. Because when people think hospitality, they think communication, right? But you're still gonna have to pick up the phone, right? You're still gonna be a human for that. And so I do think that if you can, I understand, because there's also this kind of prevailing narrative around robots are going to like take over the world and AI is moving so fast, which is actually completely valid. And I understand that as well. But I do think I would argue that for the people that are talking about that, it's like, well, I would challenge you to use stuff you're already you're already paying for software to make things cheaper and better so you can optimize other places. I think that's where, that's what I would pose back to the people that are maybe a little bit more skeptical.
All right. We're talking about our besties here, right? Our besties on this podcast are Minit. If you haven't heard of Minit, guess what? I'm about to wake up your world. Minit is an amazing device that is not only a hardware device, it's a software. You have basically a bestie at your property who is protecting night and day, 24/7, as if you were the property manager, making sure that your home and your asset was covered. Not only that, but it prevents the unawareness, let's say, of guests smoking in your homes, guests partying and having a lot more people there than there should be. It helps with all of this. So talking about besties, get with our besties at Minit and make sure that you tell them that Wil from Slick Talk has sent you. If you have more than 10 properties, guess what? They're going to give you a special deal as well. You're going to get 2 months free with the link in our show notes. And that just tells you why they're our besties. Back to the episode with Sam Dundas. Well, I agree. And the hospitality business, from restaurants to hotels to short-term rentals to anything else in between, the margins are already so thin. So I think like in order to survive and stay in the thriving industry that we are, like let's take categories aside, right? Short-term rental, hotel, restaurant, cruise line, all the other stuff, the airlines you can even consider, even though I don't feel like there's a much hospitality inside in a plane. But like, let's take all of those out. The hospitality industry is $1 trillion spend. Like we make trillions of dollars as travel and hospitality as a whole. It's a thin margin business, and there's companies going out left and right, whether you see it or not. There are businesses that get spun up and they don't even make it a year. There's some that make it 3 years, 4 years, whatever. Some can make it 20 years and then they close up shop because they don't adapt, right? Like it's just such a vital, like fragile business and industry in some cases in regard that a cost-cutting tool is the only thing you can really hope for in order to really benefit for the sustainability of your business, right? Like I think, we talk about on Good Morning Hospitality all the time, a sustainable business is a good business. Like in 2021, I think a lot of people praised venture capital raises and great. Like I still do, in the sense of like, good job if you can raise capital and fuel growth. But like, are you sustainable? Are you going to be around for the long haul? Right. And I think that's where this conversation really does come into play.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that what's really interesting to me is that I think us in general, I think as long as we're like really, really focused and anal about churn, like that is big. If you have a one-way door, like, and it's just everything's coming in, and like there's all this stuff happening and all this third-party risk or whatever, but nobody's leaving. That is at the end of the day talking about like entrepreneurship. Like you have all of these fires and you kind of just have to triage, like choose which one is most important. Like we have like 4 or 5 even today. But the thing we gotta like come down to in like first principles is who's walking out and why. You know what I mean? And as long as we're so focused on that, then our growth rate doesn't have to be 5 or 10x or 20x, or it doesn't even have to be, for some of the stuff we want to do, it's going to take some really deep AI research, which might mean the venture route, but that's going to be a product of what we want to accomplish as a company. It's not going to be raising money for the sake of raising money, So we can grow. We can either take this kind of sustainable route, and as long as people aren't churning, which so far, like we're really good. Like we've had a handful of people in the last 6 months To be honest, I'm not going to sit here and say like nobody's churned. Like I think we've had 5 users churn. Some of them one of them it was a big hit. It was like 150 listings and they'd been with us since the start and they churned, and that just happens. And that's a big hit. And then some of these people that have, 5 or 6 still hurts, like treat it the same. Like, it's like losing a limb or something for me. Like it hurts a lot. So keeping with that, as long as people stick with us, and they stick with us because they believe in the product today, you can't be like so charismatic. The product has to speak for itself. I don't like going to our friends in the industry and trying to be the guy selling them software unless 100%. I was really confident in it working. Even when we went to that retreat, even when we go to these conferences and you guys make intros and the intros in that space, it was not even, there's like, you have one shot and you don't want to be like laundering on reputation and that kind of thing. So I think to answer your question, I think just being super focused about why are people leaving, and if they're not leaving, then progressing kind of onward with new integration partners. So PMS is obviously such a huge part of our business. And then just also innovating within the product. Like we have so many exciting things that we can jump into that with Copilot or some of the other stuff we're working on. But so churn prevention and also like constantly wowing people. We want to give people like essentially a ChatGPT moment, but for their business. Like, holy smokes, how is this even possible? Yeah,
100%. I love that. You very well articulated that thought and conclusion. So this is a perfect way to segue into Copilot. Let's talk about this for a sec. Give us a high level overview, and let's talk about the actual evolution of what you guys have built at Bestie.
Yeah. So we basically decided about 4 months ago that when we built a first version of this, just because we did it only on Bestie and only for like a handful of users, and it's still available and functional. But the idea is that like talking in the abstract about like ChatGPT and what it's capable of, and me telling you it can code and it can do things, doesn't land quite as well as like showing you, So the way Copilot works is that because just what these models are capable of now, so what ChatGPT can do now is, if given a natural language instruction, instead of just writing on the internet, finding out where the answer is and giving you the answer, it can go and write code to get you the answer. So, for example, and everybody listening knows that each PMS they use connects via these APIs, these like things we don't all really know, myself included, how they really work, but people say them and you sound kind of like you know what you're talking about when you talk about them, you know what I mean? And you go and you press connect and you take your API key button, you whatever, right? So that's all happening behind the scenes anyway. So what Copilot is that we can go to that API, which is just like this big book of information for Bestie and for Hostaway and for any PMS. And then we can go to the AI. We can say, this little code thing that says get reservations, when you call for this, when you write these numbers and press it into a terminal, it's going to pull all the reservations for your listing. So this thing is a price, availability, an amenity, anything like that. You basically you teach like you would teach a person. Here's what you do to get this information. Here's where you go to get this information. So you put all that together. So all this like interconnected tissue for everything you could do with the API, which is actually everything you can do as a user, as a person, clicking around. And then you put that into a chatbot. And so I can go in, the punchline is that I can go in and text and write and say, in the last 30 days, how many reviews have I gotten in each of my properties? And so ChatGPT, like what powers it, looks at that and goes, in order to find that out, I have to call this thing, I have to write this code, and then it goes and it does that, and then it outputs the answer. So the baseline, what you're going to end up with is a thing that you can basically type to have it run anything from, hey, what's my ADR at this unit? I'm going to an owner's meeting. What's the ADR of the last 30 days? Or what was my occupancy for these dates? Or highlight 5 of our best listings and give me an email draft so I can send it to my owner. Rewrite my descriptions and listings, because it can also update things. It won't just take things, it can also update. So add these amenities to these 20 listings. And so when you have 1 or 2 properties, it's not the end of the world doing that. But when you have 200 properties or 20 properties or 30, there's a lot of things you hate doing. It's time consuming, but then there's also things you just don't do because they would just never, the calculus would never make sense. I don't have time to read through 100 last reservations and find the ones that are families and then reach out to those families and ask them if they want to come back for this holiday. But an AI could do that in 5 minutes. And if one of those converts, that's like an extra booking that took you a few minutes. Whereas it would have never made sense if you did that manually. That makes sense. So you know when you see it, it's kind of like a hipster. Like hard to explain, but when you see it. And so one even calls them hipsters anymore. That was like, I feel like nobody's even said that word for like 5 years, but that's what we're doing with Copilot. And the nice thing is, as these PMSs get more advanced, it's all good. You don't have to get more advanced. You're just going to have this little assistant that you talk to do stuff for you. Similar to how you do that with a VA or with an internal team member, that kind of thing. That's kind of how it works.
That's so crazy. It's funny. The hipster piece really got me. You're right. I don't know if I've heard the word hipster in a long time either. So it's,
I heard that on a podcast and they were talking about it and they said that exact same thing. They were like, the word hipster was like a thing for a while, but then that just became absorbed into our society as kind of just like part of culture. I was like, when did I actually hear that word for the last time? Anyway.
That's hilarious. I love it. Well, I don't even know. Like, there's so many questions I want to ask you, but in my head, hearing all these things, and I know from as I'm getting more into the startup world, right? Like I'm learning tons about APIs. I still don't know how to describe them to people just like you, where other than like it's a portal of information going back and forth. Airbnb, if you are connected to a operation software, it pulls in reservation data, and that Airbnb channel also pulls in the operation data. So like it communicates. It's a communication tool between software. Best way I can describe it. Yeah. Anyone that's
I think you nailed it.
Okay.
We'll have to get fact checked and see how at least two non-technical guys talking about APIs. But that sounds sounds like you know your stuff to me. So
100. Well, dude, anyone out there, if you're a CTO, if you're a technical founder out there, please tell us how accurate you are. Give us a scale 1 to 10. We want to know. But like that's the way I've like learned it. And there's so many data points, right? Like that, if you look at it on paper, there's millions of pieces of data flowing in that communication funnel between the softwares that I think from my point of view, and I'm putting myself in a listener's shoe right now because I get it and I trust it and I understand how this kind of works, I think a little bit. But how do you trust something to respond and to communicate and to add this amenity to do that? How do you know it's actually going to do it? Like I think there's a big disconnect between just like autopilot and like letting something do it versus like knowing if you have a VA do it. Like you're like, okay, the human person, there's a physical human process that happens versus this kind of genie a bottle. And the way you described it earlier in the episode is so hard for, I think, a lot of humans to grasp or for people to grasp in the sense of it's happening in the background. You're not going to see it. It's just happening. Like, how do you explain that?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really valid and easy problem to solve. Like we could just have a pop-up window that the AI doesn't need it, but what it could do is just run the front end of and make it somebody that's clicking around really quickly enough that you can follow it, but way quicker than what you can do itself. So for example, like we have an automation that'll respond to all of your reviews on autopilot. Even me, when I see people say, so like, oh, it's responded to 1,000 reviews, I've had to ask users like, wait, did you go and check that it actually responded to those reviews? And when you click autopilot for responding to reviews, like, do you trust it? I mean, like, because I've thought of the idea for that feature and Arlo said it works and it works. I believe him, but like I haven't gone and like checked, you know what I mean? So I think that making it, there's basically like, there's like this camp, there's like these, we're all sitting over here in this camp and there's like this finish line, which is like the promised land of AI. And it's like, it's going to be like, I can see it really well because I've been staring at it for a long time, but I totally understand that people don't. And it doesn't mean that it's just like, that's not what they wake up and look at every day because they have a business to run. So I think that you're totally right. Every step of the way, we're not just going to go and build the most advanced thing in a vacuum. We're going to walk people there with us. You know what I mean? And just not instead of like meet me over there. Like I'm like, no, we're going to do this together. And that's a big part for it. I do every single customer demo and onboarding call. And we have hundreds. Like I do 50 calls a week, like minimum. And I'm with every single person, walking them through every single feature. And that's when I can't do that anymore because we grow. I'm going to have somebody that I trust with my life to do it because you're totally right. That first like experience, I actually believe there's like people kind of came out a bit too early vendor wise and built a lot of scar tissue because it wasn't there. And so I found doing a lot of back like cleanup work for people who had one bad experience and then gave up on it, so it kind of hurts the whole ecosystem. So doing it right and spending time with the customers, getting them there iteratively. Hey, let's go and verify that it just did that. Like we do that all the time. And then they go, oh, wow. And then you do that a few times and okay, I trust it. But you're right. No one's going to just default trust it. out of the gate, unless they're very high context, like, something like that's in this every day, like me or you.
Yeah. Well, what's the future look like? And I hate asking this question sometimes because it could be so vague or it could be so open-ended, but in your perfect worlds, right? You're building an AI product, an AI tool that can do more than just communicate. It's clearly, been planned out. You guys have built features that really are supposed to give time back to the operator, which is, I think, what I want the listeners to get out of this the most. Like, you should not be a hectic host, or you should not be a property manager who is constantly in the weeds every day, in the sense of trying to run your business, plus give a good experience, plus build a good team culture, plus be profitable, plus, right? There's so many things. You should be able to have the opportunity to wake up, to not feel stressed, not have to look at your phone, to have a cup of coffee, to do whatever you need to do, and to go into the office or to hop on the huddles or whatever it may be, and have peace of mind knowing that your business is properly functioning and that your team actually can do the same thing. And so in your perfect world, what does the future look like with AI in their mix of hospitality? How does this all look out 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah. And that's actually, before I answer that, I think that's a really good point, is that like, this is the only industry I know of that is both like very like hits your kind of dopamine with like a lot of gamified bookings and transactions and dollars. Like, that's a huge part of like addictive. How do I get from 1 to 5 and 10 to 20? Like, that's, I felt that. But you also have this now indefinite, like deal with the devil, where you are just like, your phone is just, the amount of times everybody listening, I'm sure, has experienced like middle of the night, first thing in the morning, I can't fully be on vacation because of this. And I know this could go wrong and this guest is getting in late. It is relentless. You know what I mean? It is so relentless that I think that we deserve to get some of that back, and not at this massive cost that I just made enough this year to be sold to be an entrepreneur. And then I got to take 80% of that and pay a staff member and go back to being broke again. That's what happens for a lot of people too, right? They just make enough and they go, okay, but now this is too much. So I have to, all that money I made, I have to go and pay somebody for like, so that let's just agree that like, whether you really feel AI is there or not, and forget about like, I'm just as an observer, I've been in this industry 2 years as a property manager, but 8 months as a vendor. So not even coming from me as like trying to talk about software, but genuinely speaking, in this industry over the next 2 years, I think it's going to be a lot of like winning your time back without having to spend a fortune. So that's AI, that's something only AI can do. Like, there's no software out there that can promise that at all right now. And some people don't want to pay the extra fees to have somebody on. Even if you pay them, they're not going to be 24/7, or you pay them for 24/7. That's super expensive. So anyway, in the next 2 years, I think that we're generally going to incrementally start getting all our time back. And this is for people that are doing everything themselves, or they run a tight ship and they have a big operation, but it all comes to them. So yeah, there's that. And so now zooming out, like, let's say, so that's the next 2 years. I think like 3 to 5 years from now, starting at around like the 3, like for us at least, and what a big goal of ours is that there's this big trend in e-commerce where you could sell your business to these aggregators and they'll just do your operations, they'll do your accounting, they'll do your paid and advertising, and they'll just take a cut. And they'll just take a fair cut, but it's peace of mind. You still got to be in like the brand manager, the creative director. I worked, need to talk much about it, but I spent 2 years working in e-commerce, selling apps to like Peloton and Taylor Stitch and all these big brands. Like, I know that space really well. And people love that idea that you reach an inflection point in your business, you want to hand some of that over. AI, and this is like really kind of the secret sauce of what we want to do, is we want to basically turn from being this like software like subscription thing to being something that's, whether people want to do it or not, it's up to them, but that you go to a property manager who's making 25% on all revenue. And I'm saying like, this is not going to be a year from now, it's 3 to 5 years. You can say, how about you reduce 90% of the work, 95% of the work, and you're going to make 30% less. So instead of making 25%, like for example, in my operation right now, as I transition into like this software stuff, I would pay somebody half of what I make in my management fees to just not have to do anything. But I still put in all that work of putting everything together and all of the grind to get it to where it is. A lot of people sell their property management business when they kind of feel like they're forced to because they don't want to work at it anymore. So I think what it's really going to be is there's going to be this new property manager that's like a software that you can make a deal with it'll probably also be a PMS, right? So it'll probably take all of your software, probably bring everything in. Like this is kind of what we're thinking, like longer term. And I'm not saying we're going to go and cut out the property manager at all. I think we're actually going to like work with them and be like, hey, do you want us to be your back office? You focus on what you love most. You focus on getting new deals. We'll even help you with that. But owners can come to us. We can match them up with other property managers in our ecosystem. Owners come to us and know that it's going to be run a lot with AI and they're going to be matched. It's kind of like the Uber example. Uber has a bunch of people driving cars. That's their network. They're going to transition to full self-driving and have a network of that. We're going to have that same sort of network, or we can get owners to come to us directly, dispatch them to the right property managers. If you have 20 listings in Miami, I could come to you, like Bestie could come to you and say, will you take an extra 7 listings? You're only going to make 10% because Bestie brought the lead in. They're going to take the other 10% of management fees. You probably do it because you already have your operation there, right? So I think there's going to be basically a place where people can start to exit the space, but instead of exiting it and never seeing it again, they're going to be able to offshore to like an AI built solution that's going to be able to do all of those things that I'm sure people are listening be like, oh, AI is never going to be able to do that. AI is never going to be able to do that. Well, if we actually went example for example, I would challenge that. I would say, well, let's do it. Like, let's talk about each one of those, objections and let's see, can we figure it out? In the talk in Nashville, I talked about how it could pass the bar exam and what it could do today. Like chances are it could figure out a clogged toilet. You know what I mean? So that's where I think is really going. If we were to take like knowing that this is getting exponentially faster, I actually believe that you'll be able to sell your business or offshore literally like 90% of the operation to an AI property manager. And that's where I think that's kind of where we want to take it.
Dang, you heard it here first, folks. I think we're going to have some Bestie AI debates on the next roundtable that we do. We're going to get some people that want to debate with you or battle it out. Just kidding. No, but it's very big picture, and I like big picture because I think this industry, hospitality in general, has done certain things for a certain way for a very long time, and I don't know if that is sustainable, right? Like I think it's time. There's time for change, and whether it's the picture that you just painted or other changes, I think that it's going to happen, right? Like it's not when our great grandkids are old and telling their great grandkids, the way that they worked and the world was, they're not going to be telling them about this. I had to check in at a desk to get my hotel key, and they're not going to be talking about that stuff anymore. And they're not going to be talking about the things that we all know. So I think it's very important and good indication to hear what you guys are expecting the hockey stick leap to look like.
Yeah.
So I would love. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, honestly, from my position, if you consider the fact that it's moving that fast, how could you think of a future that's any smaller than that? Like, how could I tell you legit, like not just like think of pie in the sky vision for the future, like legit, if you actually can see how fast it's moving and you agree that you've been blown away with what it's capable of today within 6 months of like a couple of guys working at this, like how could you imagine that something like this could be any smaller? And that applies to every single industry. It's happening in law. It's happening in medicine. It's happening in like biotech, like it's happening everywhere. We just happen to work in this very like niche, cool industry. Yeah. So I won't say all that to say oh, here's a guy that's just been in this for a couple of months. I'm saying it actually from an observer standpoint, how could it be any smaller than something that could really actually take the driver's seat and help you in a way that no other software has been able to help you before? And I'm not speaking about specifically us. I'm saying like AI in general, but we want to be part of it.
Yeah, 100%. And I want you guys to be a part of it selfishly and just because you're freaking cool. I like you and Arlo a lot. So this has been so much fun. I love asking the question for all the listeners out there. What's one link? If you had one link to put in the show notes, even though we're going to put all of them, what do you want people to go to in order to connect with you, to learn more, etc.?
The good question. I can pick anything. I can pick anything.
It doesn't even have to be like anything related to what we talked about. It could be like, I've had Andrew Kitchell to be like, I want people to get this book and here's the link to it. And like he did, so yeah.
Okay. The book, I am actually, anybody who knows me listening to this will be like, you can't sit there and make a book recommendation because I actually am not a big book reader. Like I listen, but I have this dirty secret that I've never really read a book before, like cover to cover. I've listened to a lot of them. I guess it's not really much of a secret anymore, but I'm just
90,000 people just heard you, Sam. FYI.
Yeah, well, I can't do it. I can't live with the idea that someone's like, "Oh, Sam really sat there and gave book recommendation." Anybody who knows me would be like, "Okay, that's so bullshit." So I would recommend the audiobook. It's called The Upside of Stress, And it's like a completely, and this isn't just coming from somebody like I feel so much stress, but honestly, it's been the number one game changer for me. And just a clinical look at the way you perceive stress. And I think it's really good in this industry. The way you perceive it and the way you deal with it has like a meaningfully different outcome. Also, like depending on how you actually perceive it and internalize stress. And you can actually use it to your advantage versus it being something that like raises all your cortisol levels and, things. So I would actually recommend that book would be my one link.
I love it. Well, we're putting everything else in there too. So getbestie.ai is the site to find more about Sam and Arlo and what they're building, but also make sure we have your LinkedIn, all the other stuff, and that book, The Upside of Stress, because I need that book in my life. Not that I'm stressed either, but you know me, I have many cookie jars that my hand is in, and it definitely can get to that point. So I will listen to that as well. For all of our listeners, make sure you grab the links in the show notes, like and subscribe to all things Bestie AI. And of course, you know the drill. Like always, we'll see you again next week.
Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Wil Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.